Now, using Cartesian logic, you can begin to think and ask questions such as, what wouldn't happen if you did? What would happen if you did? What would happen if you didn't? And what wouldn't happen if you didn't? Now, you don't want to throw all of these to the person immediately at the same time because that would confuse the crap out of them. But even then, they would learn, right? What is optimal is you calibrate the client and begin to ask them one of them, maybe two of them. And if appropriate, ask them three of them or four of them, but in a way that's conversational, in a way that's easy to understand. So let's say someone says, I can't afford this. Huh, okay, what would happen if you did? If you could afford this, what would happen? Oh man, it would change my life. I can participate, I can learn this, I can really grow, right? Or what wouldn't happen? What wouldn't happen if you did? The client will begin to consider things outside of their boundary of existence, the boundary of the problem. And when they consider that, they're actually outside of the problem. Who says you have to actually solve the problem? What if you could teleport the client out of the problem? Wouldn't that be useful, right? What would happen if you do that? What would happen if you teleport the client out of the boundary of the problem? The client will not experience the problem again, right? The what if is actually a part of quantum linguistics. The what if question that many of us use already in our language. And then to get more into it, now you're in this training. You can ask, what would happen if you didn't change? What would happen if you didn't invest in yourself? What would happen if you didn't participate and change? The client will stay where they're at, and they may still progress because we're naturally programmed to progress. However, would they progress as quickly as they would like to? Right? Because too many people spend years and decades just changing one thing. What would happen if they can change it overnight? And what would happen if they choose not to change when they could change that quickly? And then instead they spend years and decades. That would be a waste of time. These are Cartesian logic and quantum linguistics. This is the core of it. And so when we begin to teach you more and more about quantum linguistics throughout the training, you'll find that this is the core. And if you can master this by practicing, why wouldn't you? You would. You would absolutely do that because that brings you great benefits. That brings you great ability to flexibly go in and out of the problem and help the client solve their problem, help yourself solve the problem, help your coworkers, your boss, whoever you work with, your spouse, your family, solve problems, right? Because people get up in the morning and they ask themselves, what if this awful thing happens? What if, they lose their job? What if they did this and did that, You want them to ask, what would happen if none of those things happen? Huh? What wouldn't happen if all of those things happen? Or what would happen if those things didn't happen? Their life would remain normal, right? What would happen instead if good things were to happen? In fact, the opposite of what they were thinking. What if all the awesome things happen? What if they start making a lot more money than they expected? What if you start making a lot more money than you expect? Can you tell how good you feel just by considering that? This goes back to how much pleasure can you endure? You've got to tweak your IR, the sequence and the order of your IR, so that you're feeling good. And consider these questions. What wouldn't happen if you did? What would happen if you did? What wouldn't happen if you didn't? And what would happen if you didn't? By doing so, you'll find that great success can be brought into your life. Just by considering the possibility. Because guess what? By thinking what if, you're changing your IR. You're changing the order and sequence of your IR. So quantum linguistics ultimately changes what's within, therefore changes what's without. That's beautiful, isn't it? Linguistics is our middle name in NLP. That's why, by changing the language, you'll find that this happens. So, and you'll notice that even in many of the patterns that we've taught you in NLP practitioner training, that all of those techniques, many of them have quantum linguistics elements within them. I'll let you choose and decide which one they are. Now let's talk about the purpose of these advanced linguistic techniques. The purpose of these processes is to learn how to just loosen the client's model of the world. Not necessarily to solve the problem, although oftentimes you may do it anyway. It may just happen because inductive thinking naturally blows the boundary from within, right? By undercutting the original presuppositions. So basically, what you're doing is that you are loosening their model of the world by undercutting what they're presupposing. So first, you've got to identify, okay, what's the client saying? What are the presuppositions in their language, right? They may tell you a problem, or maybe it may be your employee, it may be your partner in business, or your family member, your kids. Anyone may come to you with a problem, and you ask, how is this a problem, right? And that question, you hear this a lot. I say, hey, ask, how's this a problem? Really, the key of this question and the purpose is to identify all presuppositions in the sentence. So as you determine which one or which ones will have the greatest effect on the problem, you want to determine which one or which ones of the presuppositions have the greatest effect on the problem. Then you structure your response as a question and presuppose a solution in the question, right? How do you do it? Well, by doing a mind read on what the solution will work and asking a question that presupposes it, right? Then you bring the presupposition into your consciousness and you relate and restate the problem with the client. You're bringing it in their consciousness as well, of course, and you ask the question. So let's say, presenting problem, and this is going to be in your worksheet and your manual when you come to training. The husband says, I get pissed off at my wife every time I come home and see the kids' toys all over the floor. Now that's the presenting problem. So when you begin the process, you just go out and pass the point of resolution and look at the ecology and then ask them a question about ecology. Your response can be quite simple. What are you going to do with all that time when you see the toys in place? Or how good will your wife feel when you only get pissed off at the kids? Or how good will your wife feel when the room's clean? Notice how that is a very interesting way of asking questions. And then all of a sudden, it's like you feel different. Right? Because when we talk about words and we see words like pissed off, and even listening to it and hearing other people say that they're pissed off, you begin to feel a little sometimes, right? Well, by asking those questions, you actually get rid of those feelings. And also, you also got to consider, when someone tells you something from the external world, let that be a feedback of something that you can lateral chunk to and learn from. We'll get to that more later. So let's say someone says, hey, I have anxiety. What should your response be? Because that's an existence presupposition. You can say, when are you sure that it's not there? Oh. Because really, when you think about it, is it always there? If someone says they have anxiety, they really sometimes have to think about it. Or they have to be in a certain place in their mind to be in that state. Because states do not, remember this, states do not stay consistent. They have movements. All states have movements. Without movement, the body and the mind would actually become used to it.